All right. I'm Dan Gibbons from the City Club of Chicago, and I'm joined by the one and only Rufus Williams, our City Club board member and morning host at WVON Radio. And we're here at the Chicago Firehouse Restaurant in a partnership with U.S. Conference of Mayors and WVON and City Club, of course, as we welcome the country and the world to Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. And it's really it's been an incredible week so far, and it's only Tuesday, and we've had some amazing people coming and going here at the Firehouse at our City Club hub, and today we're going to welcome Shermann Dilla Thomas. I know we're just supposed to call you Dilla, right?
Yeah, I prefer Dilla for sure.
I'm going to stick with that.
But in context, you got to give the whole thing. So now we know Dilla, the Chicago historian.
Yes, sir.
Who tells all about the city of Chicago and all the things that are going here from a unique perspective, from his perspective.
The Chicago historian.
Chicago historian.
It's amazing how quickly that has happened. I know it's been many years, but in the last few years, I'm seeing you on T-shirts, on hats, tell us about your journey. What are you doing, and how did you make this all happen in the last few years?
I wish I did make it happen, right? And if that was the case, I would have made it happen a little bit earlier than I did. But it's amazing what can happen when you have good intentions behind a thing. And my sole intention was to get on this new thing called TikTok and uplift Chicago. I take it very personally everywhere I go when somebody says something negative about Chicago, particularly when they say it out of context. I stop and correct people all the time, and they say, "Oh, you're from Chicago, don't get shot." Now, we're going to have a conversation, and now I got to tell you that of everyone who gets shot, when we recover guns, 90% of them come from either Indiana or Kentucky or Wisconsin, right? And, so we're going to have that conversation. And anyway, on TikTok during the pandemic, to bond with my children, I just started telling like little cool Chicago stories, right? How Bertha Palmer invented the chocolate brownie, or her chefs invented the chocolate brownie for the World's Fair, or how the Galvin brothers were needing to drive to New York, but they didn't want to listen to each other talk the whole time, so they invented the car radio. And the car radio was invented by the Galvin brothers, which is what we now call Motorola. It shocked me how many people didn't know these things. These are stories I heard in my house, stories that I learned researching. And then from there, it gained a lot of traction, right? And being from Chicago, what all us Chicagoans know, no matter what your ethnicity is or your background, when you're from Chicago, you're extremely proud to be from Chicago. Like it's a badge of honor to be from this place. And so Chicagoans got behind me, and my small TikTok channel went viral, and I ended up with hundreds of thousands of followers on the page. And then from there, I didn't want to be what I would call corny and start chasing sponsorships, right? Let me do these TikToks for, whatever brand so they could pay me money, right? Maybe that helps me, but how do I take this thing that really was a gift from the city? Living in Chicago was a gift for me. How can I give this gift back? And so from there, I started Chicago Mahogany Tours, and the two kind of married to each other. So I make social media content about Chicago, and then I take people who come to Chicago on these neighborhood tours, and it's been really awesome.
You were ahead of the pack with putting out information on TikTok. As we've talked to young people lately and some older people, this is where they're getting their news. This is where they're getting their information. And the challenge is, how do you get information that's credible from these spaces? You're giving information that you've researched and that you're putting out there. So you've got a credibility issue that doesn't exist. You don't have the credibility issue that exists in some other places. Can you talk about, being that you've been there on TikTok, people who are going there for information, how do we make sure, or how do we suggest to them that it become credible?
That's a very excellent question. We have a responsibility as content creators to put out accurate information. Even if your content is jokes and things that are funny, right, it still should be rooted in some type of truth. And one of the ways we can do that is by challenging the content creators to cite their sources. There's still very clever ways to cite your sources in your content. You don't have to put it at the bottom of your bibliography like we're in college or anything like that. But I think in the captions of your video, you can say this information is gleaned from the United States Labor Statistic Board, right? If you're making content about unemployment rates, right? Either say it verbally like, hey, Chicago has this, that, and the third, and I got this information from this, right? And that gives us a chance to vet you. And I think your reputation over time will show us that you're putting out accurate information. And it's so easy to do. You can, wherever you got that information from, you can either put it in the captions, you can put it in the comment section, right? So that very first comment after your video are your sources. And I think that's important. And I think people who enjoy content should challenge content creators to do that. So same way, like, we challenge newspaper writers for a very long time, people to write op-eds and say, hey, this journalist got this wrong, or this journalist misrepresented themselves. And the newspaper will have to run a retraction and that sort of thing. Well, same thing, when content creators say untruths, the same way we bombard their comment sections to say, hey, good job, and agree with them and have conversations, we should bombard them and say, hey, this was wrong, this was inaccurate, and you need to, same way you made this big, loud, wrong video, you need to make a video saying, hey, that I was big and wrong and loud.
You made history cool, right? And it's so much more than history. And Rufus and I have talked a lot about this. How and what are you thinking, and how are you taking history and understanding the importance of it guiding us for the future, right? This next generation, you're teaching all sorts of people that didn't know that they liked history until you brought it to them. How are you using that as a tool to actually better the next generation?
Well, I try to give people examples of what they're contemporarily into and show them how it historically worked or how it didn't work historically. And I think connecting the past to the future at every point that you can is how you maintain that. And so, with my kids, if somebody wants to be a basketball player, we're not just talking about, shooting the ball in the hoop sort of thing, but we look at other athletes who've become professional basketball players. What other life choices did they make, right? Were they the guys at all the parties on Saturday night or Friday night, or did they recognize they had a game Saturday and they slept in? We try to find, it's easy to do, right? You can find people who went to school with Quentin Richardson, right, who went to Whitney Young here. And then we look at what he did historically at Whitney Young. You come to find out that Quentin Richardson wasn't at all the parties. He woke up in the morning, he was in the gym working out because he had a goal. And then I used the history of his success to use for the future. So I do that in a number of things. I've been trying to do that with policy right now during the DNC. I was fortunate enough to be one of the 200 content creators that got credentials to be at the DNC. And the very second it was announced that Chicago won, I immediately started using my Twitter platform and other spaces as like a bully platform, bully pulpit to say, are we going to make sure the DNC sees all of Chicago? And are we going to make sure that they go to the west side, that they go to the south side, that they go over east, that they go up north, that they leave the downtown footprint, and that they're spending money in these spaces? And then I talked about how the history, that it wasn't necessarily the case in 96, and how that left a bad taste in Chicagoans' mouths. And if you want progressive here in Chicago to support you, and progressives in Chicago to get on the phone and call their friends who they went to college with and went to school with in other cities to also support the Democratic Party, you got to give them a reason to do that. And that reason would be you showing them that you're here to support BIPOC-owned businesses, that you're going to have women-owned vendors, that you're going to have Asian American-owned vendors, that you're going to have Mexican American vendors, and you're going to go visit their spaces, and showing the history of why that did not happen in 96. And what happened? Well, 2000, you couldn't get those same progressives to boot up for you, and George W. Bush won the presidency, right? And so the history showing that it's hopefully a tool to be used to show how we can, have the results that folks want in 2024.
When you move to that, and you talked about how you vertically expanded from being the hip hop historian. Talk about the Mahogany Tours, what you do with that, where you go, how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run Chicago Mahogany Tours. Our mission is to highlight and disseminate the rich history of Chicago. And on my tours, we take you to Bronzeville. We've been fortunate. We've taken a number of delegates out this week. We've taken people from Montana, Vermont, New York, Georgia. We show them policy in action. And it's the same thing we do when the DNC is not in town, right? I want you to see the infrastructure bill working. How do we see that? We go to 43rd Street, across the street from the Forum, and we see Phil Beckham's project, right? The first transit-oriented buildings on the South Side. That's a byproduct of the Infrastructure Act and infrastructure happening in Chicago, and the Green Line on Damon Street being fixed, and the work they're getting ready to do on 43rd. We also show you when policy doesn't work, like the policy of redlining. And we drive by and we count the vacant lots that we see on the block. And we show you that is a direct result of not only redlining, but restrictive racial covenants before that and land sale contracts after that. But we also uplift things too, right? We go by Margaret Hyding Lynn Park, which is that cool basketball court on 18th Street that has the tracks going over it that's featured in all the video games. People play ball there every day because it's picturesque, but nobody knows who Dr. Margaret Hyding Lynn is. And so I tell you that she's the first woman ever to be inducted into the International College of Surgeons. And she hand-delivered over 6,500 babies in Chinatown to make sure Asian Americans had a higher birth and mortality rate. We take you to Pilsen, and we stop at Benito Juarez High School, and we talk about how a lady named Inez Laredo, she went on a hunger strike because Pilsen didn't have a high school for the Mexican-American students. There was no high school there before Benito Juarez. And so they were having to take the bus to Tilden, to other places. They were being bullied and discriminated against. And so, regular Chicagoan fought Mayor Daley to get Benito Juarez High School. So we show you that, but it's also, we show you cool architecture, right? We point out the Queen Anne, gray stone buildings. We show you what a two-flat is. We explain why two flats have those cool long hallways that we know in Chicago, and it's because of the Chicago lot size code of 1909, right? 25 feet across and 125 feet from front yard to your alley. That's Chicago lot size, and so you can only do so much with that, which is why the two flats are perfect for it. So we talk about that. We talk about the built environment. It's a really good time. I crack jokes. I talk stuff about my kids.
You play your videos?
I play my videos. So it's interactive. It's very interactive. So if I've made a video about a subject or building or person, when we pull in front of their house, I play the video.
So I have to ask you the obvious question. If she delivered all those babies, she did all these things in Chinatown, why a basketball court?
Right? So we talk about that too. Sometimes in our fair city, there's like, what is the word that I use? It's performative activism, right? And so sometimes when the Asian American community starts to say, hey, we want to be seen and acknowledged in the city, then the city will do something where they can cut a ribbon, right? So since 18th Street is right there by Chinatown, we're going to name this park after you and cut a ribbon, right? As opposed to something more substantive.
Yeah, it makes about no sense at all.
I've been driving by that park for my entire life. My kids play basketball there. I had no idea. Thank you. Anytime I talk with you, I learn something new, and I pride myself on knowing a lot about Chicago. It's incredible. There's things that we know we invented the zipper. We know we had the World's Fair. We had the Chicago Fire. All that. These elements that we don't know about. Where are you finding this stuff?
It starts with a very inquisitive mind. I'm thankful to my grandma, who's no longer with us, but she would always say, if it has a name, it has a history. And so that's everything, right? That's the name of the school you went to. That's the name of the street that you grew up on, right? That's all the way down to why did they name the Ford Mustang, right? If it has a name, it has a history. And so I'm always looking for the history behind the name of everything. To answer your question, I spend a lot of time just rolling down to the Newberry Library, and I'll give them a neighborhood, and then they'll go bring me the archives from that neighborhood. And sometimes, when Brother Dan lives to be 140 and he goes on to glory after 140, maybe your family gives your collection to the Newberry. And so all the cool emails you've ever sent. Well, back in the day, we didn't have emails, but people would write diaries. And so diaries are very good first-person sources, especially if the lady wrote it in 1919, right? Why is she lying in her diary? She ain't, right? And so I read those diaries, and I that's how I know that the Calumet High Schools on 81st and May ain't the first Calumet High School. It was one before that. That's the second Calumet High School, right? I seen the pictures of it in these people's diaries. And so repositories, I get a lot of information out of. I'm always in the newspaper archives looking. Then I got a college student, and when she was a freshman, I stole her ID so I can get the ID number so that I can go in ProQuest. And so I'm always in ProQuest reading other people's dissertations and thesis.
So my wife gives me a hard time about listening to podcasts all the time. You sound like you're much more fun than I am.
Oh. My wife, oh my God. Her favorite thing to tell people is, especially before all of this happened for me, somebody would say something about Chicago on Facebook, and before I replied in the comments, I would go run in my library and pull out books. And she took this picture of me one time, and it was 3 books around me, and I got a highlighter because I'm trying to find the exact source just so that I can reply to a comment on Facebook. She's like, boy, you got a problem. You need to do something with your life. You're way too much of a nerd for this.
So Dilla, this story didn't start when you started doing TikTok videos for your children during the pandemic. Tell us more about your background and where you come from. You're from Chicago. But
yes, sir. I grew up in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. I'm the son of a Chicago police officer. My dad, no longer with us, but Officer Lamar Thomas was a cop for 32 years. He was vice president of the African American Police League when Pat Hill was the president. So I grew up with Howard Sappho and Don Parker, Lynott Robinson, and all these guys. And they were very historic minded. And so they asked you a question and you didn't know the answer. They would give my dad stuff, and then my dad would come home and give me stuff. And so then that lead me to researching. Yesterday, I was lucky enough to give a welcome address at the Illinois Delegate Breakfast, and I told them that I'm the byproduct of when they get things right. I just happened to be coming up through Chicago where we had the Mayor Daley summer jobs. So at 14, I'm working at City Hall, right, and I'm experiencing this. When I'm, 9 and 10 years old, there are still extracurriculars in public schools, right? And so we, after school, we'd walk to the Thurgood Marshall Library, right? And, people would point me in the direction of Chicago history books. I've always been that kid that if we walk past a sign, my family would be a whole block up, and they turn around and I'm back there reading the sign, right? So it's always been me, just very inquisitive. And then I've been calling myself like the Forrest Gump of Chicago, right? I was a Chicago lifeguard for 10 summers in a row. So every summer, that was my summer job. But I would only pick the same pool twice because I wanted to see the city. And so, I got cussed out for being the black lifeguard at McKinley Park, right? And I wouldn't let them run me off. I would, but somebody be calling me the N-word. The pool opens Memorial Day, and may I be the color lifeguard need to go back to the hood. And by Labor Day, all the Irish people, I was their black nephew, right? I just would stay and win them over. You know what I mean? And so that's I worked at Palmer Park. So I worked at Oakdale Park on the west side. I worked at Humboldt Park when Humboldt Park was Humboldt Park.
Remember?
And same thing,
I've still not walked through Humboldt Park,
right? No, I've done it recently, and I couldn't believe that I was doing it. I took a tour group over there, and right on Black Hawk and Sacramento, the road turns yellow.
Right.
Because the corner where Frank Baum wrote Wizard of Oz. And so we've been taking people over there.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, Wizard of Oz was written right here in Chicago.
Yellow Brick Road.
Yes, sir. So I got to, my dad was Mayor Harold Washington's bodyguard, right? He was Eugene Sawyer. He was on those mayoral details with Eugene Sawyer.
Yeah.
With when Carol Mosley was running for senator. Back in the day when the police league was still running, African American Police League was still up, all the black politicians would pick them to be their bodyguards. And so that put me around a lot of history makers, and history makers talk history.
So you read a lot of books. You spend a lot of time in libraries, and so much of this is online now. Have you thought about writing a book?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I want to, I already copyrighted this. Thank God I can say it because people would jack your idea. But I want to do a series of 100 dope Chicagoans you should know. And it's, right, 100 dope black Chicagoans you should know. 100 dope Puerto Rican Chicagoans you should know, right? 100 dope Native American Chicagoans you should know. So my ADD has it to where I got about 65 done under all the demographics. So if I could just sit down and just
another 35 or anyone,
and just launch it, right? So I'm working on it. I took some time. I'm going to take time in October, the last 2 weeks of October. I didn't book any tours. I'm not going to do any speeches. I'm not going to any of the HBCU homecomings. I'm going to go rent a room somewhere and hide and turn my phone off and finish at least 2 of them.
You're not going to any homecoming?
No, not this year. I'm going to take it off. Although my daughter goes to North Carolina A&T, and I can't wait for her to be walking out the party and seeing me on the campus uninvited. It's gonna be so awesome.
Oh, we can't wait till we can't wait till you finish that, because that's going to be an incredible book, and we hope you'll come back and talk about it at City Club when you do.
Yes, sir. Oh yeah. I'm working on
books
that.
coming, because you're what I love about all this. You are creating history. You know so much about Chicago's history, but what you are doing is creating history that a lot of people in, like you said, 100 years are going to look back and realize this city is a better city because of what you're doing.
Man,
and who you're sharing that with.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that as a Chicagoan. I know City Club appreciates all that you're doing. And what we try to do also is identify people like you who are lifting this city up, and companies and businesses and innovators that when we figure out some of these folks, we try to get them into our club, our circle, and elevate their message a bit to
I'm
just
so lucky
keep doing things better.
That the other, I'm starting to be better with documenting with what's going on to me in the moment, so that it's available later. But I get to see the best of Chicago, right? Non-for-profits call me and say, hey, we want you to take our groups out on these neighborhood tours. And I get to be around people who care all day long. Cook County Juvenile Court said, hey, we want you to take our probation kids out, right? And show them that they're walking on sacred ground, right? They live in these neighborhoods. If you live in Bronzeville, Jesse Owens walked those streets, right? He won. He did exactly to the T. He wins the gold medal.
You ran those streets a bit, right?
That both, right? He wins the gold medal in Berlin, comes back to the States. They're throwing this big party for him in Ohio, and he has to walk through the back door of his own party because he's a black man in the 1930s, and they won't let him go through the front door of his celebration because he won the gold medal. So he calls Ralph Metcalf, and he's on the phone crying to Ralph, who also was at those Olympics. And Ralph Metcalf say, man, brother, come on, move to Chicago. We take care of you, man. I'm going to holler at my boy, John Senstack. He's going to give you a job as a sports writer. And 2 weeks later, Jesse Owens is walking down what we used to call South Parkway Boulevard, and he's buried right here in Chicago. And our kids don't know that. It's a crying shame. You go to a Chicago school, you go to Percy Julian, you walk in and you say, hey, y'all, who Percy Julian? And they don't know. And I'm not even blaming anybody anymore. I just take it upon myself that if you run into me, you're going to know that Percy Julian is one of the first black men to get a PhD in chemistry, and that he is responsible for progesterone. It's one of the most important reproductive drugs in our country right now, right? Women who struggle holding a baby, they give you progesterone shots every month. He invented that, right? And I'm just going to do my part, and hopefully, others decide to join in.
That's good. Well, I'm looking forward to your books as well. We'll have to get security, because if we're going to stop at 100, 101 is going to be upset that they're not in the book. But it's a wonderful, wonderful idea, wonderful stories. And to Dan's point, every time we have a conversation, something else is learned. And the way in which you teach it is the way in which people are getting information they need to know. So thank you for doing what you do.
My pleasure. Thank y'all.
Can I take 1 minute and ask you, put you on the spot? We're in a pretty historic building here, an historic neighborhood. This is the Chicago Firehouse Restaurant was a firehouse. There's the hay door in the back when the horses came in. There's a lot of history here, recent history too. It burned down. It almost burned down. Just about 10 years ago. Just right here, 5 feet from us, President George W. Bush had his 60th birthday dinner with Mayor Daley and a few others. There's a lot of history in this building. And the fire department itself is such a big part of Chicago's history. What have you learned about the fire department, or perhaps this, even if you know anything about this building or these firehouses?
Man, it's such on the spot. I'm gonna be cussing in 20 minutes when I'm able to pull the architect's name out. I can't say it right this moment, but it's coming to the top. So I know a number of things about the Chicago Fire Department. One, it was black folks in the Chicago Fire Department on Engine 21 that invent the fireman's pole. The first time any fireman ever grabbed a pole and slid down it, it was black dudes in Chicago that invented the fireman's pole somewhere around 1874. And I guess my favorite Chicago firefighter story is that we, to your point, we're fighting fires on horses, right? And the so just like all of us with animals, or most of us with animals, right? You fall in love with the animals that are around you. So the firemen really love their horses. Like they were their boys. And so when we started to transition from horses to fire trucks, the firefighters would sabotage the trucks so that they could keep the horses around longer.
But what decade are we talking?
So this is the 19 teens leading up to 1920. The very last time we respond to a fire on horse is 1923, and that's because the city finally says, "Hey, look, you get to the fire quicker in these trucks than you do on horseback. We're moving on. We're going to retire all the horses."
Government's efficient?
Yeah, well, maybe then, right? So hey, we're getting rid of these horses. So they say, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to set a mock fire. It's 1923. We're going to let you ride in on the horses, put the fire out, and we're retiring the horses." And so in February of 1923, they set that mock fire, and the mock fire gets out of hand, and some real stuff burns down because they were trying to give the firemen one last hurrah on their horses. Right?
That's incredible. That's a great story.
It's one thing to research and do the videos. It's another thing to retain all this information that you've been able to share with us on the spot as you do. So amazing.
Thank you.
Been great to talk to you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Both of you guys are Chicago legends. I don't know if people tell you guys enough, but the integrity of Brother Rufus, even when the subject is, sometimes we don't like taking our medicine. Brother Rufus gonna give you the medicine, but you always feel the love in his voice, right? Like some things us as Chicagoans hold on to that we don't need to. And a lot of times he's at the forefront of telling you, like, hey, this ain't cool, or this ain't right, or this ain't good for the city. It's always from an integral and space of love. And then, so thank you. And then you, Brother Dan, a lot of times, I'm just going to be very honest, a lot of times when a white man is in charge of something, it ain't going to be a lot of people of color invited to the party, except for February and Juneteenth, and then maybe in September for Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month, right? And everything else is just going to be some other white dude. It's like the total opposite with Brother Dan. I be wondering, like, he might want to do his ancestry. Bro, he might be 32% Ghanaian or something. He don't know. I don't want to get in your great-great-grandpa in no trouble, so maybe don't do it. But, no, I appreciate just how you treat all Chicagoans, just like Chicago, and anybody that got something cool and productive to say, they're invited to your space, and that's dope as hell.
Thank you, Dilla. Thank you for saying that, but thank you for being dope as hell and adding so much to our city and to this conversation. There's so much more to come. Rufus, we are very fortunate to have Rufus involved. Thank you for those kind remarks about him, because we're so fortunate to have him as a member of this City Club family, and there's so much more to come. And we look forward to having you along with us on that journey. And really look forward to sharing this message. I think there are going to be a lot of folks that are going to find all sorts of nuggets in this conversation, right. Especially all those who love Chicago. So from the City Club of Chicago, you are in the room. You all, thank you for joining us in the room. On behalf of Jackie Robinson Ivy, our chair, and Rufus, one of our board members, Dilla, it's great to have you here. We look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.